Dyann Lyon. Hello there, Dyann Lyon.
Amanda.
You were raised in Tacoma, and as I mentioned before, you are Babe Blair's niece. And tell us about your earliest memories of Tacoma and what your family and what your upbringing was like.
Well, I started out at Lowell Elementary School, and it's so wonderful that she has created that amazing statue there of Marvin Clankman, because we grew up knowing about Marvin and knew his family and really connected to all of that. And then we lived grew up in South 17th, then moved over to the top of McCarver, and then suddenly my parents built a home overlooking the Narrows Bridge, and the streets were made of dirt, but we had a great view. And so I was 10 years old when we moved in, and suddenly I was in a different school. And I think that's when things really started going weird for me. I'm the oldest of 4 kids, and my 3 younger brothers were, they're still great guys. I'm very fortunate. We all get along really well. But at 10 years old, I hit puberty. And I was as tall as I am right now. I was 5'1". Actually, I was 1.5 at one point. And
but we're not counting. Compared to Pamela, you're a midget.
And it was, things just got really awkward for me. I remember my parents having always wanted a bike. And on my 10th birthday, my parents got me a bike, and I got on it. And the neighborhood kids started teasing me because it had training wheels on it. So here I'm a 10-year-old, bigger than any of the other kids in school, and that was the last time I ever got on a bike. I've still never learned how to ride one.
Yet.
Yeah. And I started my period. I mean, everything was just, in 5th grade, I was the only girl going into the teacher's bathroom, and so things got weird really early for me in that regard.
And tell me how your parents reacted to that.
I don't recall a reaction of any of that. It was just the way it was. I remember when I started my period that I didn't know what that was. And I went to my mom and I said, Mom, I'm bleeding. And she said, show me my mouth. She wanted to see my mouth because I'd been complaining all day of a canker sore. So it was like neither one of us were prepared.
I would call that disconnect.
Yes, we were very disconnected in communication around the home about things that would have been great to have learned. So I totally can relate to what Pamela was saying there.
And your family, because your family was and is so well known in Tacoma, your father had this surreal work ethic and character ethic that he really, really put upon you, didn't he?
Yeah, a lot of pressure, a lot of expectations, and I've thought about it so many times about the boundaries around me were so tight that I couldn't maintain those boundaries. So as soon as I went over the boundary, I was in trouble. So in essence, I didn't realize this at the time, but I can look back and see that there were no boundaries. So boundaries are something that really had, it took me decades to relate to what are boundaries and how do I create those in my life and what do they look like.
Because you were used to more punishment, abandonment, and then trying to work yourself back into those good graces.
Yeah, I didn't think of it as that at the time. I hadn't thought of the word abandonment. I never felt abandoned. I felt criticized and that I never measured up. Mm-hmm.
So something happened to you in your, I would say, 16-year-old, 17-year-old age bracket that changed your life forever. Mm-hmm. And you've talked about this before at the Health and Happiness conference that Willow sponsored. Tell our audience what it was.
Well, just before my 16th birthday, I got pregnant. And in 1964, that was not cool. There were really no options at that time. Abortions were not legal. It wasn't even a conversation, so I don't want to make it sound like it was, but that was not an option. And the hardest conversation I ever had with my family was telling my parents I was pregnant. I mean, it was just like, it's not a place I don't like going back to, but it did happen. And their solution was to drive me to Spokane, Washington, and drop me off at a Salvation Army home for unwed mothers. And so I spent 4.5 months there, and boy, that was really the time where I learned how to stuff my emotions. To be 16 years old on my own with a home full of other girls, we're all kids mostly, that were all pregnant, and we were in these dormitories, and down at the end of the hall was where the birthing was. So at night you'd hear girls screaming. And it was just a terrible, terrible place to be. But at the same time, always made the best of any situation. I'm super adaptable. So I adapted to it and made a lot of, made a friend whose name I actually still remember. And we've not maintained a friendship, but I do remember the time there. And I was so busy stuffing my emotions because there's no way I could fall in love with a baby I knew I was never going to know. So, certainly at that time I wasn't conscious of all this. I was just in the process of learning to stuff all my emotions and really going through the motions of the situation.
So you're 16 years old, you have a baby, you give it up for adoption, you come back to Tacoma, and is there a big sit down with the family of how are you, welcome back, how have you been?
No. It was, I flew back home by myself, and I don't remember a lot of that time, but I do remember very clearly my dad taking me to high school. I'm a Wilson grad, and the principal not wanting me to come back to school. He said that it's too disruptive, we can't have her here. And Dad said, looked at him and looked at me and said, she will never talk about this, so it won't be disruptive. And that was it. That was the entire conversation on that. We never did talk about it, ever. In fact, it was only in the last year, well, I won't go that far. It was just something we never talked about. I just went back into my life.
So you stuffed the secret, went back into your life, went back into high school, up against those strict rules that your father boxed you in with, and then what happened next?
I graduated from high school, and I went to the University of Washington, and I was acting out so much there, drinking, and it was the beginning of me being introduced to alcohol. It wasn't too long after that, pot. I mean, this is the late 60s, and sex. I mean, it was all of that stuff. So I started acting out and found myself flunking out. I petitioned to get back in. They allowed me to come back I was going to Western at the time, and I just couldn't go back after flunking out. So I went to TCC. 1968. I remember that year very well. That was it was a year of really trying to get my act together. And but somewhere along the way, I met a guy and got pregnant again. So it was 5 years later.
And what happened this time?
Well, I didn't really know what to do except to have my baby and have it adopted, because I couldn't picture keeping a child knowing I had one out there. I just could not bridge that gap. And so I went through the process. I mean, I knew what to do and found a doctor locally, and he took care of everything and had my baby adopted.
And you're here in Tacoma, so you're in the same town as your parents. This time, you're not in Spokane. How did your parents react?
It was really a rough time. Mom never really talked about much of anything. But I will say my Aunt Babe, she's the one human being that I could have conversations with about what was going on. There was no conversation in my home that was off limits. It was just, she was just, I remember sitting in her kitchen a million times having conversations with her, and she was the one person I could talk to. However, I still had a life out there, and I did, I actually married the father of the son I gave up because now we didn't have to get married. That's how screwed up my brain was. That, it's just, I even saying that just sounds weird. But, so we got married, that didn't last at all. It was just bad. We were doing drugs, I was so far off track that I just did not know how to get back on track. So we did get divorced, and I got myself back into college. I moved to Portland and went to Portland State. My grandmother was there. She's the other woman in my life I could have real conversations with, besides my aunt. So she was on my mom's side, my aunt was on my dad's side. So I had two women in my life I could have real conversations with, and that was in my family. That was really awesome. So I graduated from Portland State with a degree in graphic design. I got an awesome job, and life was good. And then I met Marv.
And Marv is?
He worked in the same building I was in, a pathological liar. I didn't know that at the time.
Oh my!
He looked really good though. He had a three-piece suit, and it just like really, I was so, seriously, I was so far off track.
I think we're not laughing at you, we're laughing with you. Because all of us have had these conversations in our head. Ooh, three-piece suit, okay.
Yeah, so that was a terrible, terrible situation. I had zero flexibility because he just was such a control freak, and I had no power at all in my relationship. But I did have an awesome job.
And that kept you sane?
Yeah, it did.
So I want you to flash forward now because I can hear the audience going, where are the children? What happened to those two children?
Well, excuse me just a second here.
Hold that closer to your mouth, my dear.
In 1997, I got a call one night from a woman that said, are you Dyann, Lyon, and did you have a child on whatever date that was? I have to really think about my kids' birth dates because I really stuffed everything. And I just had this big shit-eating grin from ear to ear because I never expected that call. And the next day I was on the phone with my daughter Ruth Ann, who was 32 at the time. That was 18 years ago.
Yeah, give it up. Absolutely.
And then I hired the same person she hired to find me to find my son. And within a few months I met my son, and Ruth Ann, who lives in LA, flew up here. We drove down to Ashland for her to meet him. And one of my most incredible memories is sitting in my son Mark's living room with Ruth Ann, just the three of us, late in the night, and listening to the two of them tell their stories to each other about what it was like, their first memories, and the whole adoption process, and it was magical. It's so surreal. I just love them both. I'm so grateful.
Wow, boy, talk about turning lemons into lemonade. That's it right there. You have, in these last few minutes, experienced a profound death in your life to someone that you were married to, but you've also found love again. So just take a few minutes and share that with us.
Well, I really, somewhere along the way, so in my early 80s when I started real estate, that I got that I had some personal development my first time, and realized that if I could treat my personal life with the same care that I would my work life, that maybe things would be totally different. It was like a huge paradigm shift for me. And then I met my husband, Lee. And we were married nearly 20 years. He died of a heart attack at 50. And that really was, that was a real blow. It was really hard to go back to my life. And so I kind of dropped out of my life and finished up all the boards I was on. One was TCC. And I didn't really know what I was going to do. I thought I'd finally be the artist that I want to do. And then I was dicking around online, and so I had my name in there somewhere, and my darling husband Wild found me from Canada. He was looking far and wide, and he finally found me.
And you answered the wild call.
I did. Yes, I'm so grateful.
Call of the wild. Wild's here today, isn't he?
Yeah,
Wild,
he is.
where are you?
I'm here.
There, right in the front row. We love that. So, these last 30 seconds, I know for a fact that we have women and men out there who have given their children up for adoption, who maybe don't know where they are or haven't even begun to open up and talk about that yet. What advice do you have for them, Dyann?
Ooh, I would say don't be afraid of whatever occurs, and if you want to look for them and can find, search for them if that's what's in your heart. I would follow your heart as to what you want to do, but just for life in general, just don't be afraid to continue forward and find a path that feels good. It really is about feeling good, because for many, many decades I felt really bad about myself. So finding that place in your heart that makes you feel good about yourself, and whatever that leads you to, stay on that path.
Yeah, I can see it in your eyes. I can see a whole person working from a place of overflow, and it's brilliant. Dyann, thank you so much.
Thank you.